The last time I covered a movie on this channel was 2 years ago. That was when I covered Suspiria. In the intro of that video, I had shown 3 sealed DVDs. Of course, Jennifer's Body, the second movie I've ever covered on this channel. The topic of that time, Suspiria. And then the elusive Eraserhead. Since then, its coverage on this channel has only ever been a dream. But who is the dreamer? In this case, David Lynch. Or perhaps us, the viewer. I'm already getting lost in the weeds. Eraserhead to me is David Lynch's attempt to rise to a challenge, depict angst in its rawest form, a nightmare, both a literal nightmarish dream, but also the figurative situational nightmare, an unprepared, unintended, unwanted parenthood. Going into this movie, I knew this much already, but I wasn't prepared for how raw and effective Lynch would capture said angst. Now, before explaining the premise, please consider watching the movie yourself. It's a classic movie to add to any collection, however, the premise of the movie is very simple. The angst that Lynch is depicting, or the medium of the angst, is the fear of parenthood, starting with the early germination of a pregnancy scare, but then in a blink of an eye, each story beat passes, a blistering leap into the failures of fatherhood, the reveal of an otherworldly, horrifying spawn that you must call your kin, and then a finale that will leave you horrified, guilty, and relieved, if you could believe it. Now, I should say this. David Lynch's works are so widely explored and discussed that there's a high likelihood, a guarantee, that I'm going to come out of this video with a similar, if not identical, overall takeaway from this movie. It's all about the fear of being a parent, the horror of a child you don't want, etc. But it's my hopes, however, that with my frivolous fine-tooth comb method of exploring media, I can impart some new realizations and angles that you can appreciate in future viewings of this wonderful but terrifying movie. I want to continue to keep my intro short, but I do want to front-load this little kind of disclaimer first. My methodology in how I cover topics requires me to go into said topic as blind as possible. However, as a big fan of David Lynch, I'll be going into Eraserhead a little bit tainted. As the video goes on, I want to assure you we're going to make room for said taint. But without further ado, let's dig into the horrific absurdity that is David Lynch's first ever feature film release, the 1977 Eraserhead. Starting our movie, we see our title card, Eraserhead, and speaking of which, we see the side of our protagonist's head, played by the late great Jack Nance, who played Pete Martell in Twin Peaks. Of the many repeat collaborators with Lynch, such as Laura Dern and Cale MacLachlan, I find Mr. Nance to be one of the more underrated actors. He's got a face that fantastically occupies the middle point between deadpan and expressive. Something about his eyes and cheeks are doing a lot of that work. He's like a cross between John C. Reilly and Charlie Chaplin.
You'd never guess. There was a fish in the percolator.
Anyways, the scene before us is the transparent head of Henry, our protagonist, awkwardly floating up and down over this strange meatball planet. His face is kind of aimless, but there seems to be a simple bliss across it, untouched by the horrors that are the coming events of this movie. Speaking of coming events, we slowly zoom into this meatball planet. Now, I'm going to say this now, and I'm like 100% certain I'm not the first guy to say this, but this is a symbolic sex scene, done in an artsy-fartsy, absurdsy way. Getting up close to the planet, we travel across a crevice, somewhat resembling a canal. The hidden sexual imagery takes us to what looks like the top of a roof with a hole broken into it. It's tempting to make a decision right now as to what this symbolizes, the breaking into the ovum, for example, or a broken condom. But let's allow ourselves to just zoom into the darkness. Inside the home, on the planet, there is a man staring out of a window. The credits name his character as the man inside the planet. If it's not apparent, it will be soon. His face is covered in these sort of pocks, and there seems to be a sort of gash in his torso. Keep this in mind. We then see Henry's mouth open. The man in the planet continues to stare. Then an alien-like representation of a male reproductive cell emerges from Henry's face. And then, after some contemplation, the man in the planet twitches, anticipates, then seemingly full of rage, suddenly pulls one lever. The singular sperm cell flies off the screen. Another lever is pulled. A strange pool on the planet is shown. And then the final lever is pulled. The gamete falls into the pool of mercurial liquid. Conception. honestly kind of obvious for David Lynch. I feel more certain about this than I did at the end of Twin Peaks: The Return. And this is Eraserhead, one of his more notoriously opaque movies. Well, we're just getting started, I assure you. Just warming up, physically stretching before we do the analytical stretching. After we see the gamete make its plunge, we get a view from within the liquid. Small bubbles from the splashing rises to the surface. And then our view looks up at the hole of which we infiltrated. So we're taking the perspective of the sperm cell, looking up at the opening of the egg that we've just entered. And on the outside of this is pure white static windiness. That is where we came from, but it's also like the pure white windy ending to the movie. So, whatever place that is, that's where we come from, but that is also where we go. In a 2007 BAFTA interview, David Lynch famously stated that Eraserhead was his most spiritual film. When he was asked to elaborate, he simply said, "No." Now, as far as the extent of that interview is concerned, that's all I know. If this is your first time watching this channel, I tend to take a blind approach to the topics that I cover. I try to go in with as little bias as possible, as little outside theory crafting as possible, so that my interpretations and extrapolations can be as novel as possible. So, with all that in mind, with this prejudiced knowledge of the inherent spirituality of Eraserhead fresh in our noggins, I want to bring some attention to that white windy outside that can be seen from the inside of this freshly fertilized meatball ovum planet. It's fitting that we see this in the beginning sequence of this movie because there's really only one other scene that has such a white sort of color scheme, and that's at the very end. Whatever this white area is where we come from, but also where we go. Sort of font of souls, a soul cairn, an endless dream. Before moving on, in case I didn't emphasize it enough, let's keep in mind this man inside the planet, this lever puller, especially his various physical maladies. With that introductory, reproductory sequence under our belt, should probably reword that, the white whistly windiness fades onto the seemingly concerned face of our protagonist Henry. Note this use of the train whistle. There's a pit in the stomach-inducing nature to this scene. It's hard to, I guess relate to if you haven't gone through a pregnancy scare yourself, but there's this feeling that, like while I was f***ed off, doing my own thing, in the case of Henry, he's coming back from work, starting his vacation time, while I was totally unaware, the egg was being fertilized. The earliest stages of pregnancy are happening in my partner, and so, unaware, I think Henry is being haunted by this train whistle noise. The train can be seen as a simple transitory symbol, taking you from one stage of life to another, from like a bachelor or a single guy to a father. But in the case of Eraserhead, don't laugh, I believe it could also be meant to evoke a train going into a tunnel, an innuendo haunting our unknowing protagonist. Sex being not a medium for the creation of life or the sharing of joy with a romantic partner, but a medium, a phantom that represents the total upending of your own life. But also, this could also be like the start to one of Lynch's many favorite, motifs, sounds, invocation, symbols, whatever you want to call it. One of the things I'm going to have a blast doing is kind of scouring through Eraserhead and seeing what seeds were planted that would germinate and blossom into various symbols, stylistic choices, and motifs in later David Lynch works. I don't know if I've already said this, but I really want to emphasize this is his first feature film. So we'll cut to this whiteboard anytime I notice something that kind of reminds me of something else, usually in Twin Peaks, in Eraserhead. But if you're a big fan of David Lynch, you also know he has a big affinity for dreams, or at the very least, dreamlike aesthetics. And so we'll cut to this whiteboard too anytime we see anything dreamlike. In this case, it's a little bit of both. This train noise. The only thing train related that I'm aware of in later David Lynch works, at least that comes to mind, is Ronit Pulaski being found alive, kind of walking catatonically on the train tracks in Twin Peaks. But the reason train stuck out to me is it feels like the noise it makes, that noise, that windiness, that whistliness, to me is a very Lynch-coded thing. It's not just the noise too, it's that steaminess, that mechanical, metallic nature to it. What's this thing called? Real quick, let me just see. What's the proper term for that? Like a chimney? Okay, here we go. So the proper term is a choo-choo tube. It's very much Lynch's bag. Henry, with a paper bag, is walking about in a goofy, awkward way in these long, drawn-out scenes, not only emphasizing his awkward personality, but I would argue also emphasizing him, and we'll come to learn his girlfriend, being too young for parenthood. Again, I have to say, there's like this horror to his cluelessness. If only you could shout at the screen and tell him to prepare for the news he's soon to hear. Well, after climbing up and down these small hills, he steps into a puddle, an inversion to a condom failing. In this case, a fluid outside the shoe and sock infiltrating past to the body part within. Again, these are symbols that are haunting our protagonist. It's not like everything is a symbol for something and then that's where it ends. To me, the various euphemisms, double entendres, things that we're going to be seeing are in plain sight omens, phantoms of sex, of reproduction, that are looming over our unaware protagonist, Henry. Not just peppered throughout the movie, but from the very inception of the movie. In high school, when I first ever watched this movie, under the pretense that it was like a horror movie, it was at this particular shot when I started to question whether or not this was actually a horror movie. If only I knew. Anyways, this world is bleak. His wandering is aimless. His very existence is grayscale. Here I am worried for his coming change in life, but perhaps fatherhood could bring purpose and color into it. What life is there here truly that could be negatively upended by this coming news? Now, I'm not co-signing this stupid idea that one should try and have a kid with someone to fix their marriage or restore their relationship, or let's just mix it up. Urban Dictionary refers to this as the fix-it baby. In those cases, people are justifying a pregnancy that hasn't happened yet to force themselves into a scenario where they have to make things work, kind of light the fire under their ass, using the creation of new life. In the case of Henry, the pregnancy's already passed. By the time we get the news, the baby's already out of the oven. So the reason why I bring up the bleakness of Henry's life, pre-baby news, it's not to advocate for the fix-it-baby concept. It's not like trying to inundate like this whole thing with, like, he should be grateful that he has a baby kind of thing. It's going to make his life more colorful. The reason I bring up the bleakness is just so we can have a big picture view of Henry and candidly analyze how he sees this unplanned baby. How many of us men in our youth have taken unplanned pregnancies, pregnancy scares, present company included. What is it that we are so scared of losing? We're working with the fear of losing the mundanity, the simplicity, and even the bleakness of an aimless youth. It's a fear of no longer being able to wake up and not know what you're doing with your life. Well, now you're waking up and everything hinges on your ability as a father. Now, most great adults are able to rise to that challenge. But when you're an aimless, simpleton whelp, a young man or even a boy, it's terrifying. We get some more fantastically oppressive imagery, my favorite. There's some more train whistles blowing until we enter the apartment building of Henry. And of course, we've got those familiar zigzaggy lines on the floor. We've got this sort of bleak, oppressive machinery and kind of cityscape. Pipes, abandoned buildings, steam, whistly, windy noises. It's very dreamlike. Some might say liminal. And I would argue this is a very Lynch-coded thing, but maybe I'm being a bit too liberal with that label. However, it is pretty cool how in his first ever feature film, in the lobby of the apartment building of Henry, we've got those zigzaggy lines, a very famous Lynchian motif. I don't know, it's really cool to see an early iteration of his electrical flair. We'll get some more electrical flair in a second, but I want to draw your attention to this easy to miss or I guess overlook moment. Henry rummages through his empty mailbox. No mail, further emphasizing his isolation. Again, with resilience and support, he could take a scary upending and make it into something that brings warmth. But anyways, in the elevator, his face is anxious. I don't think he subconsciously knows the news he's about to get. I think that there are other circumstances that we will come to learn that's feeding into his anxiety, or he's just always like this. But here we have a better view of his eraser-shaped head. Now, I am absolutely excited to get into what I think the significance is in the title Eraserhead. Only because I came to it on my own, as a blindish viewer. However, just from the fact that this is a David Lynch film, like from like a stochastic monkeys on typewriter kind of, point of view, I am fairly certain I'm not the first or even one of a few who's going to tell you what I'm so excited to tell you. But for now, in my blissful ignorance of where the Eraserhead discourse is at the moment, keep in mind the eraser concept to Eraserhead. This is not just referring to the shape of our protagonist's head. There's something more essential to the eraser. Now, after some very Lynch-coded electrical issues, Henry shuffles into his flat to be interrupted by his neighbor. In the credits, I believe her name is the beautiful woman across the hall. She asks him, "Are you Henry?" He says yes. She tells him that Mary, his girlfriend, was trying to get a hold of him.
A girl named Mary called on the payphone and said she's at her parents' and you're invited to dinner.
Oh, yeah?
They share a look. While I can't get a read on her, Henry is just anxious through and through, starting his final, goodbyes with a gulp.
Thank you very much.
So, Mary, his girlfriend, is at her parents' place trying to get a hold of Henry to invite him over for dinner. A strange upgraded commitment regarding the relationship. Now, rewinding a bit before the start of this hallway parlay, we get some emphasis on the paper bag that Henry is holding and his pocket protector. If there's another piece of bias I'm coming into when it comes to Eraserhead, it's knowing how particular David Lynch is with his scenes. He definitely had the late great Jack Nance position himself in this scene to show off his pocket protector and the paper bag. Two items that have been obscured up until this point. First thing, the paper bag. You may have just assumed that it contains some lunch or maybe groceries, but there is significance to what it contains. And come to think of it, if we interpret the paper bag as not a bag, but a sack, if you catch my meaning, what we're gonna find in that will have a very strange irony. Speaking of which, the pocket protector. Again, a sort of condom-like item for the pocket, and the phallic implements within, some pens. But also it looks like pencils with tall erasers. Already, my crown jewel theory, which may not even be that impressive, is staring us in the face. You need not wait any longer. Upon entering his apartment, he places the paper sack down on the table, and you know what? I'm gonna read my initial scene-by-scene personal notes while I was watching and initial stuff, initial thoughts. Inside, we see him put down nondescript food items, or maybe big hunks of rubber. Oh, f***ing duh! Eraserhead, rubberhead, condom head. And thus is the punchline, if you will, of my crown jewel theory. Or really, realization. Erasers are made of rubber, and a rubber is a euphemism for a condom. You might think that's a coincidence. However, we just saw the iconic pocket protector, pocket protection. However, the essence of the eraser is quite different from the essence of the condom. Whereas the eraser is meant to undo the mistake, the condom is meant to, sounds a bit crude, but prevent the mistake. Nonetheless, the thematic linking is there, and that is, to call it crown jewels a bit, a bit hyped up, but that is my most satisfying kind of realization. The mystery as to the significance of the title Eraserhead. Not very satisfying right now, kind of jumped to the conclusion a bit too early. However, let's keep this in mind as we travel through this story. All these subtle ways the movie kind of points to this emphasis, this desire to flee from a reality of creation and towards this desire to undo, a desire to erase, to become a golem of that desire, to become an eraser head. It doesn't stop there. Right after he puts down these hunks of rubber, mind you that we're inside a bag or sack, so a bag holding things that are in essence to undo rather than create, he plays some music, Lenox Avenue Blues by Thomas Fats Waller. Now, I want to be open about this. There's a strong, foggy glass between me and Lynch when it comes to his, affinity for pop cultural stuff, like his music, the music that he likes, movies he likes, television he likes. For example, as much as I love Twin Peaks, I really didn't ever resonate with the references to shows like Dallas that many mention Twin Peaks gathers its inspiration from. That might be a Mark Frost thing though, but anyways, that's nothing a bit of Wikipedia skimming can't compensate for. There's some interesting significance, possible coincidence, to the inclusion of Fats Waller's music in Eraserhead. The piece of info that I'm basing this off of in Fats Waller's Wikipedia article is pulled from the biography titled Fats Waller by Maurice Waller, his late son, and Anthony Calabrese. In 1921, Thomas Fats Waller had a son with his then wife Edith Hatch. Eventually, Edith, displeased with Thomas's stubbornness with sticking with this financially unstable career of music, ended up divorcing him, where he would then be inconsistent with paying child support, even serving some time for being overdue. He was a man whose whims were at war with his duties as a father and, well, husband and then ex-husband. Certainly, if Henry was a big fan of Mr. Waller, perhaps the personal story of the titan of stride pianism would certainly educate our protagonist's coming angst. In Henry's apartment, we can see what looks like piles of manure or dirt. Might be a bit of a stretch, but I wonder if this is like a code-compliant way of depicting poop. Obviously, manure, fertilizer, but specifically the oddly common occurrence of people seeing a lot of poop in their dreams. In some cultures, it's considered a sign of wealth. When it's come up quite a bit in my dreams, I've always kind of associated it with kind of like a loss of control, a feeling that there is no safe or clean place to do your business. That's kind of how I associate it when it comes up in my dreams. Could also be another phantom of conception, a fertilized egg, a fertilizer, haunting our unknowing protag. He then puts his soggy sock on the radiator to dry it off. This radiator is a key set piece, and to me, an early indicator of David Lynch's affinity for kind of mundane household objects. Again, it might be a bit of a stretch, but when I saw this and the fixation on this household object, I immediately thought of the ceiling fan in Twin Peaks. And I'll say this now, the fact that my mind keeps going back to Twin Peaks kind of shows that I'm not as credible as a David Lynch fan, I think, as most are. You know what, now suddenly occurs to me the sort of spermicidal theme going on here. Searing what essentially is a foot condom on the hot radiator. This will actually be echoed when we first meet the lady in the radiator. I know I'm just not relenting on this specific apartment scene, but also behind Henry we see a pile of dirt or soil with a leafless, I think the term is deciduous, sapling growing out of it, a looming symbol of already fertilized soil, germinated saplings or whatever, but also kind of reminding me of the arm in the later iterations of Twin Peaks, specifically Twin Peaks: The Return. Now, obviously, if anything were to be referencing the other thing, it would be the newer thing referencing the old thing. Although, it wouldn't surprise me if Lynch did plan that far ahead. After all, when Laura said, "I'll see you in 25 years, she meant it. I say all of that because we're gonna see actually a far larger version of the sapling, better resembling the arm, and in an environment, curtains and the black and white flooring, that also echoes the location we associate with the arm in Twin Peaks. Anyways, beneath the radiator, we see a close-up of what looks like either that fertilizer or like the manure, or perhaps just like soil and like grass. I'm gonna have to refrain from looking this up as to not taint my analysis, but doesn't David Lynch's Blue Velvet have a scene that emphasizes the grass and the soil? Or am I thinking of American Beauty? I think in this case, it's just, just a dreamlike non-reality just staring Henry in the face. He's looking down and he's not even thinking, oh, well, that's odd. He's surrounded by so many euphemisms, so many innuendos, omens, fertilizer, pocket protection, recently germinated saplings, rubber, trains. It almost feels like the plot is using these objects to sort of blare this news to Henry, and he's just all the more oblivious to it. Oh, come to think of it, the needle on that record, a needle in a groove. That was a bit crude. After looking outside the window to take in the view, or lack thereof, he rummages through his drawer. He puts a coin inside a dish of water with coins already inside it. Make a wish? Perhaps some absurdity lightly foreshadowing his wish for a redo? a wish to erase. He pulls out a ripped image of his girlfriend Mary, ominously torn across the neck. Lynch is known to have a lot of intent with how scenes pan out. There may be something to Henry grabbing the lower half of the picture, then putting the coin inside the dish, and then with that coin hand grabbing the top of the head of Mary's picture, reassembling the image. Like make a wish. Oh, maybe reassembling. Maybe he's making a wish to see her again. Following that train of thought, at first I took this torn image to mean that they have broken up. However, I think we'll have a better idea of the state of their relationship very soon. In this next scene, we see Mary anticipating Henry, clearly worried, of course about to break the news to him. We see Henry walk along train tracks on his way to Mary, or I guess Mary's parents' place. He's between the rails, but then scared out of them when startled by barking dogs and glass breaking. Where he then walks the remainder of the shot outside the rails. I think some fear, maybe tied in with some more innuendo. He's the needle in the grooves of the vinyl record. Now, when he arrives to Mary's parents' abode, we can see the dilapidated surroundings. The front yard looks like a cross between a scrapyard and a graveyard. We can also see these little specks blowing in the air for a moment, reminding me of some, eraser shavings in the wind imagery much later in this movie.
You're late, Henry. I didn't know if you wanted me to come or not. Where have you been? You never come around anymore.
Dinner's almost ready.
Couple of things. First off, this reeks of teenage romance. While these characters are depicted by adults, not necessarily done up with makeup or etc. to kind of give the illusion of youth, they act in this very awkward, courtshipy way. Even this whole meeting the parents thing, at least how it's depicted in the coming scenes, are more akin to like the awkward interactions of meeting a date's parents like on the night of prom or on like a movie date, rather than like an adult meeting a partner's parents for the first time. I don't know, it's reminding me a lot of my teenage years, but even a couple of anecdotes in my early 20s. So regardless, we can digest this front porch scene, in my opinion, as emphasizing their naive youth, their unpreparedness for the parenthood to come. Now, with this in mind, I think this small conversation shows why Henry had a torn up photo of Mary. Despite there being no indication of a breakup, he assumed as such, because she never comes around anymore. Where's she been? And of course, as we'll come to learn, Mary was dealing with the pregnancy and of course recent delivery of Henry and Mary's baby. Perhaps she stopped coming around when she started to show, so I don't know, she might have been MIA for 7 to 9 months. Now, I was curious about the address number of Mary's parents' home, 2416, but however, I made the mistake of specifically Googling 2416 Eraserhead, which was dumb of me, given my aversion to tainting my personal blind theory crafting. But alas, I was flashbanged by a tempting Reddit post by Not a Ghost Probably. Now, I didn't want to dwell too much on the majority of the post. I was already in mimetically vulnerable territory, so I just focused in on the singled out Bible verse, Deuteronomy 24:16. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children to be put to death for their parents. Each will die of their own sin. At a glance, I'm like, this is a bullseye. I was excited to see this and was prepared to double back and read more of that post. But in the spirit of going in blind and looking at this with a fresh pair of eyes, in my opinion, the more I looked at the verse, the more it seemed kind of concerned with how one should conduct justice in a sort of sins of the father-like scenario. Strangely enough, the early verses in the previous Deuteronomy chapter, 23, talk more about marriage, childbirth, and specifically children out of marriage. Eraserhead is not so much concerned with the inheritance of sin, debt, and whatnot, although there is one moment of imagery that kind of implies the child inheriting the father's woes. The part where we see Henry's head pop off and it gets replaced by the head of his baby. Maybe that might be a spoiler, but who cares? Not sure though. Personally, I'm inconclusive about this Bible verse. Regardless, there certainly is intent behind this number. David Lynch is a very intentional guy. I can definitely see him saying you ever been to Plano, Texas? Sending someone to Lowe's to pick up those little number plaques to customize this scene. Now, we see Mary's mother sitting on the sofa, and the greetings shared between her and Henry are very, again, teenhood courtship type stuff.
Hello. I'm very pleased to meet you.
Sit down.
Again, we've got that awkwardness, that deference, that am I screwing this up kind of dynamic. Henry's jacket is closed up in an awkward way. His arm is awkwardly perched on the couch and he's sitting weird. And you know, I realized one thing. I don't know if Eraserhead is supposed to be this explicit, which is ironic given all the imagery and like symbolism I've been going, but this is a bit too raunchy. But the way his hand is moving, I feel like that, if that is intentional, it's very risque. I don't know, is that on code? Anyways, let me stick back to what I was originally kind of noticing. So he's sitting weird. His jacket is, buttoned up in a weird way, or I guess like closed up in a weird way, and his arm is doing that strange movement. If you take a look at his pocket protector, one of the pencils is shifted up compared to the rest. In my opinion, I think he's got what we call an NARB, a sort of spontaneous rigidity. There's nothing in this scenario that would warrant this response. Frankly, this whole thing is nerve-wracking. The body, parasympathetically responding to stress with penile tumescence, to me is very awkward young guy coded. Of course, I'm just looking for things to confirm my belief that these two specifically symbolize a teen or very young couple rather than just any old angsty adult couple. I do want to continue following this theory or framework or hypothesis of Mary and Henry's youth because I just feel like it enhances the woe and the pain of the story all the more because of it. This emphasis of choices being made out of your hands, you not having true agency over your own destiny. We see a dog nursing her puppies, obvious child-rearing imagery. However, I think its obviousness maybe is meant to encourage the viewer to kind of go back and read between the lines on some of the previous or even future sequences. The sizing up commences. Of course, Henry's asked what he does for work. He says he's on vacation, and then something strange happens.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I work at Lapel's factory. I'm a printer.
Henry's very clever at printing.
Okay, yeah, now we're getting Lynchian here. Okay, I got my work cut out for me. There are 3 angles we can attack this scene. Despite the unplanned nature of the pregnancy and the seeming shakiness of the relationship, the two are tripping over themselves trying to impress the mother. Think about that. You don't really have any need to sell your boyfriend to your mom if you're just not really interested in keeping the relationship going. You're not coming around, you're not interested in nurturing it. You kind of want to let the relationship die. But because of this pregnancy, there's like this need to submit to authority, needing to appease the parents, going through with the unwanted pregnancy, trying to gain approval from your parents over something that you don't even want for yourself. It's horrifying. But we glossed over this. Mary's mother says,
Mary tells me you're a very nice fellow.
Again, Mary is preempting this meeting saying he's a nice fellow. Maybe even like when it came out that she was pregnant. Who did this to you? X, Y, and Z. Haven't we met him? No, please, Mom, he's a nice guy. X, Y, and Z, all that stuff. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Now, the second angle. Henry works as a printer at Lapel's factory.
I'm a printer.
Henry's very clever at printing.
Ironic that he has erasers in his lapel. A bit too obvious for Lynch. Not enough power lines and coffee spilling. I'll give him a break. It's his first feature-length movie. In all seriousness, let's dig into that. He's the titular Eraserhead, but he works as a printer. To me, this is sort of setting up an ironic mirroring, or perhaps a shift in position. I no longer want to print, to copy, to reproduce. If only I can go back. If only I could erase. If only I could abort. Finally, that strange proto-Lynchian, slightly scary, slightly humorous fit that Mary has in the middle of the conversation. Not sure if I can glean anything from Mary's seizure specifically. I was thinking maybe something regarding pregnancy. Like in a later scene, we're going to see her gnash her teeth a bit. And I kind of went down this rabbit hole regarding like nausea medication, but I was like, I'm getting lost in the weeds. Let's just chalk it up to some Lynchian absurdity. We're going to get quite a bit of this in this movie. Some of my favorite scenes. out of context is so great. What I really found fascinating was the hairbrushing. This is taking place between a mother and a daughter. It's a sacred ritual that has yet to be passed on in full to the kin. To me, further indicating that these two are very, very young and very unprepared. The father pops in, and this is such a great scene. I hope I can play this out in full. I might have to chop it up a bit to avoid copyright issues.
I thought I heard a stranger. We've got chicken tonight. Strangest damn things. They're man-made. Little damn things. Smaller than my fist. They're new. I'm Bill.
Hello, I'm Henry.
Man-made chickens, little things, size of your fist. A little, bird-like thing, man-made, similar to the baby that we're about to meet. I'm sure I've already kind of spoiled what the baby looks like, but it's very balut-coated. The mom mentions that Henry works at Lapel's factory. The dad responds, "Oh, printing's your business. Plumbing's mine. 30 years. I put pipes in every one of these houses as it turned from pastures to the hellhole it is today."
Dad.
Bill.
Now, people think pipes grow in their home. Well, they sure as hell don't. Look at my knees. Look at my knees.
Bill, please.
Are you hungry?
Bill.
This is just like meeting anybody's parents when you're young. Not even like a date's parents. It's so horrifying, awkward, and funny at the same time. Now, my millennial rotted brain picked up on something specifically regarding the father's plumbing occupation, and I almost immediately waved it off, the innuendo feeling a bit too modern for the 1970s Eraserhead. However, I looked into it and came back inconclusive. So, Henry's occupation being printing emphasizes reproduction. Mary's father's occupation was quite literally laying pipe. It seems way too modern of an innuendo. However, I was able to find one website that claims that the term, or broadly the innuendo of pipes and plumbing as, the double entendre, date back to 1940s. This was on dictionary.com, and it was the only website I could find that even mentions that, and I couldn't find its sources. So take that with a grain of salt. And on top of that, the earliest movie that I could find that uses plumbing as a medium for adult-themed storytelling is Adventures of a Plumber's Mate, released in 1979, so too late for Eraserhead. I was going to do more research, but sadly I had to cut it short because at this point I was getting kicked out of my local library. Even if we disregard the whole the innuendo aspect, we can still very much tie occupation to manhood in the dynamic between Henry and his soon-to-be father-in-law. We see the two youths sitting awkwardly on the couch, the father basting the chickens and the mother preparing some salad. And there's something oddly like bleak but also wholesome in this scene. The other side of motherhood is naturally daughterhood. We see Mary's mother guiding what looks to be her mother, or Mary's grandmother, in the preparing of dinner, much like how you might include your child in the dinner preparation process. A seemingly catatonic mother is being guided through mixing some salad, even given a cigarette like one might give a kid a candy for a job well done. Like I said, wholesome, but at the same time, there's a bleak exhaustion to this particular scene. Also, something about an old lady smoking in the dark was kind of hard. Now, dinner commences with a cuckoo clock. Indicating that maybe the child isn't Henry's. Keep this in mind. There might be something to this, even if just as a passing symbolic flourish. And at this point, maybe I'm just seeing things, but the movement of the cuckoo bird kind of looks intentional. Now, this next scene, from my recollection, is often fondly remembered as just a funny, absurd scene. David Lynch is being David Lynch. But forgive me if my takeaway is a bit darker. Dinner starts with the father talking about his arm not working.
Doctors said I wouldn't be able to use it. Well, what the hell do they know, I said. And I rubbed it for a half hour every day. And then I got so I could move it a little. And I got so I could turn a faucet. And pretty soon I had my arm back again. Now I can't feel a damn thing in it. All numb.
Doctor said it wouldn't work. I rub it every day for 30 minutes, but now I can't feel a thing. Numb. An old man losing his virility. Hold on to that. Not literally.
I'm afraid to cut it, you know? Mary usually does the carving, but maybe tonight You'll do it, Henry. All right with you?
Of course. I'd be happy to. Do I just cut them up like regular chickens?
Sure, just cut them up like regular chickens.
Henry is a boy, or at most a young man who, if my theory on his age is correct, has faculties that just turned on and started working. So, like the older woman brushing the hair of the younger girl, we have the old man handing off the duty of reproduction to the next generation. Of course, symbolized by Henry being given the duty of carving the chicken. That might have sounded unhinged, maybe I'm moving a bit too fast. The reason I say all of that is because of this following scene. The bleeding chicken can evoke two things. For the purposes of this scene, it symbolizes incorrectly or painfully executed coitus between two very young people. The bleeding of the chicken's canal is the damaging of the hymen. And for the purposes of later scenes, however, this could also be kind of foreshadowing an abortion, or maybe more late stage in what we consider an abortion, depending on your interpretation of the ending. For the purposes of this scene, let's stick to the former framework. The chicken is smaller than the usual dinner bird. In other words, young. It's man-made, conceived by man, not bird. So human, a human girl. Mary. This is a scene that simulates the physical encounter between Henry and Mary. The awkward shifting legs following the penetration of the fork, and then of course the bleeding. And despite what's being depicted here as awkward, clumsy, kind of scary, the mother seems to be aroused by this. Remember, the father's arm doesn't work. The marriage perhaps has lost its physicality. So, in a twisted way, this youthful simulation of something awkward, painful, and anxiety-inducing is something that stimulates the mother. It sounds very uncharitable, but just wait, this is going to be confirmed in a very brutal way very soon. Nonetheless, poor Mary is traumatized by the absurdity of all of this, and while she flees, Henry is more a freeze-type guy. The dad breaks the silence with,
Well, Henry, what do you know?
a sort of throwaway line like, it is what it is. But Henry responds to it literally.
I don't know much of anything.
He doesn't know what he's doing. Sex, life, work, family, etc. Again, he's just a kid. Now, this is happening over eternities of awkward silence. Afterwards, the mother emerges from the kitchen to break the news to Henry.
Henry, may I speak to you a minute? Over here.
This scene is just so horrifying. You know, Henry gulps. The dad is just smiling at him, and Mary, poor Mary's crying in the background. The lights shorting out is a bit odd, but maybe it's just, again, some Lynchian flourishing. Let's get to the meat of this coming scene.
Did you and Mary have sexual intercourse?
Why?
Did you?
Why are you asking me this question?
I have a very good reason. And now I want you to tell me.
I'm very... I love Mary.
Henry, I asked you if you and Mary had sexual intercourse.
Well, I don't think that's any of your business.
Henry!
I'm sorry.
The mom interrogates Henry about whether or not he and Mary had sex. His answer is, why are you asking? I'm very... and he kind of trails off.
I'm very... I love Mary.
Henry!
Probably, I'm very fond, but then changes it last second to, I love Mary. He then puts up a wall. I don't think it's any of your business. It's a boundary. Of which Mary's mother responds in a truly sinister way. She compels him to cooperate, or else he'll be in big trouble. And then...
Well, Mary?
She starts to kiss his neck. this might be symbolic of something else, but literalistically, this is sexual assault, molestation, you take your pick. Henry calls out to Mary, which breaks my heart, and Mary sees her own mother assaulting her boyfriend. It's just fucked up on many levels. It's here that the mother reveals the baby's birth.
I'm too nervous.
There's a baby. It's at the hospital.
Mom!
And you're the father.
That's impossible. It's only
Mother,
been...
they're still not sure it is a baby.
It's premature, but there's a baby. After the two of you are married, which should be very soon, you can pick the baby up.
Now, a lot has happened here. First off, his response to the news.
That's impossible. It's only
Mother,
been...
they're still not sure it is a baby.
It's premature, but there's a baby.
He's cut from continuing that thought, lending some credence to him not being truly the father, it being too soon. Although, that can just be denial. Mary says that they don't even know if it is a baby, which, if you haven't seen the movie, will certainly pique your curiosity. Perhaps the baby is theirs, but maybe it's prematurely delivered or came out deformed and not looking human. Going back a bit more, when he calls out for Mary, it is heartbreaking, but almost religious, like calling out for the Mother of Christ in your worst moments for intercession. And then it hits me. A girl named Mary, and sort of oblivious boy, and a baby that, well, doesn't look like it comes from this plane. A strange twist to the joyful mysteries of Christ's birth. After all, David Lynch said it was his most spiritual film. For now, I'm pretty staunchly of the mind that the child was conceived by Henry and Mary. The opening scene blatantly told us, in an implicit way. The mother leaves to get Henry some ice for his nosebleed.
You don't mind, do you, Henry? I mean, about getting married?
No.
When she says you don't mind, it's not, you don't mind being a father. Hey, can you please help me? It took two to tango for this to happen after all. It's not that. It's, you don't mind if we get married. This is certainly not of the whims of the in-shock teenagers, but the whims of the parents upholding traditions and appearances. If there was any chance that there was a future between these two, a happy marriage, skipping to that big step, mired in so much stress, is going to place a brutal overtone over their relationship, dooming it. One major ingredient to the story of Eraserhead is a feminist story, from the perspective of the masculine in this case. A lot of the scenarios Henry goes through reminds me of some of the scenarios we see girls often go through in stories retold to us through feminist media. And strangely, not much is different in the case of Henry. He is a boy, forced to take on adult roles in some ways, but still treated as a child in other ways. His lack of experience, his lack of agency, is leveraged against him by adults. Of course, you got a very obvious pro-choice aspect, a very real angst of an unwanted pregnancy, and not having the means of ending it before it's too late. In our times, because of reactionary law or just medieval levels of medical unavailability. But in the case of Henry, which, mind you, the fact that he's not the one getting pregnant, it changes the dynamic a little bit, but nonetheless, he was kept totally out of the loop. The angst is still very much valid. Stepping away from the pregnancy, you've also got that all too familiar scenario, an adult using the whole you'll be in big trouble kind of angle, using authority and even assaulting Henry. And even from Mary's perspective, it's plain to see that all of this mess, from the shotgun wedding, the pressure to continue on in this relationship, of course, to have said wedding, the pressure to have this pregnancy despite the risks that we will soon see when the baby is revealed, is all pressure coming from the parents, coming from the top down. Consent, agency, I don't know what the good word for it is, but just choice has been robbed from Mary. I want to rewind for a moment. Look at this shot. Mary is in this square-shaped shelter of pipes, a home, a manger. I don't know what tableau I'm thinking of, but Mary being in a home while a message is being delivered outside of that home to a Joseph-like figure. I don't know, it's very Joyful Mysteries coded. The mother is a sort of godlike figure, telling Joseph, this is my will, accept it, or you'll be in trouble. A much more scarier retelling of a story that's honestly very joyful. But, I mean, think about the position of the Nazarene couple. I wouldn't blame him for having mixed feelings about the whole thing, especially Joseph. If we really wanted to follow that formula, the mother could also be a Saint Gabriel the Archangel type figure. But now I'm really starting to think that maybe there are other characters who would better fit that bill. Okay, I'm all over the place. No use dwelling over a half-baked theory when the bun is already out of the oven. The scene transitions from Henry's face to the dog, and then we see the hay and some bookshelves, and it takes us out to the window. Oh hey, the hay. You know, the whole thing about Jesus being born in a barn. Or in this case, something a bit more decrepit, like Barstow. In this next scene, the baby is finally revealed. Possibly resembles a very early stage fetus, of course sized up to the scale of a newborn, maybe, but it's also kind of dino-like. I don't know, it's cute, it's horrifying, it's the thing of nightmares. It's not at fault. This scene is very stressful too. You would think that the parents of the new parents would offer some support, but no. Mary is on her own, feeding, or struggling to feed, the baby. We see Henry go to the lobby and find a small box in his mail. For some reason, he walks outside to open it, probably for non-diegetic lighting reasons. He unwraps it to reveal what looks like, a small black cube, rusty. And inside we see those little peppers that you get with orange chicken. Well, according to the synopsis on IMDb, it's a worm. Maybe it's a seed, a larva, both thematically appropriate. But whatever it is, it seems to have some sort of shameful or villainous implication. Because when Henry approaches the door, he seems to hide the worm. Something about it is worth keeping a secret from Mary. Odd. Possibly just the start of the degradation of the relationship, keeping secrets when they should be open with one another. Henry walks in, smiling at the baby and Mary, and then sort of breaking. I'm not entirely sure if this is meant to mean that the smile was, like, wholly insincere, like, at least not fake. Like, if anything, it's a genuine attempt to put on a brave face, but it's still being put on, like half sincere. I don't know, there's layers. It looks like Mary is finally getting the hang of things, feeding the baby successfully, and then she has a happier moment. And this also makes Henry smile. We're given a bit of mercy, a moment to realize that we've been holding our breath this entire scene. Henry sort of hangs at the edge of his bed, looking down at his radiator. Again, he looks like a little boy here, kind of daydreaming. I say that because if he truly were in his 30s, I think he would be depicted as kind of more sprawled out, kind of on his bed, tired, half comatose, playing Balatro on his phone. Now, just like before, the radiator is surrounded with this hay, which suddenly occurs to me is kind of dangerous. Inside the radiator, we see a stage lit with a circular spotlight. More on this later. Right now, what happens here is best interpreted as the childlike imagination of Henry being interrupted with the cries of adult responsibility.
Was there any mail?
No.
So we've gone from hiding the mail to lying about the mail. A horrible way to start the relationship off. Night falls and Henry is putzing with that little larva seed pepper thingy. Mary is still awake, secretly. However, I don't think she's spying on Henry. I think she's just so caught up in her own head, this being their first night as a couple raising the kid, that she can't sleep. But yes, Henry puts the little thingy in the little curio and the baby starts crying, keeping Mary and Henry from sleeping. We see a strange bargaining, your turn, no your turn kind of thing, but done by scared teenagers not having developed the communication skills. And just when things are about to calm down, the baby is startled by some outside noises. Ah, gosh, what a nightmare. And listen, don't get me wrong, I'm in no way, shape, or form an anti-natalist or hate children. Children are great, children should be protected. But that includes the children, Mary and Henry too, that's why it's such a nightmare. And zooming out for a bit, the nightmare even itself isn't like the baby or like the creation or stewardship of life. It's the very real fear of something that you don't want to hate, something that you don't want to have contempt for, but still upending your life. It's a very selfish fear that this movie kind of forces you to face. If I wanted to be more charitable, though, maybe it's just the fear of not being enough for the child, not being a good enough parent. But I think we're playing with the more selfish mindset.
Shut up!
Shut up!
Mary has had enough. We see a proper argument break out between them. I need some sleep. You said you're on vacation. You take care of the baby. And then Henry says,
Why don't you just stay home?
the two are isolated in their own bubbles of fight or flight. Proper adults, prepared and happy for the beautiful gift of parenthood, will still struggle, they'll still fight, they'll slip up here and there, but there's a security that allows them to open up and lean on each other. Ideally.
I'll do what I want to do. And you better take real good care of things while I'm gone.
This scene at the foot of the bed is hysterical. Like, at first you have no clue what the hell is going on until it's revealed that she was trying to pull out a comically large luggage. Now, of course, the movement of the squeaking bed is another possible innuendo joke. Or maybe I'm just hooked on a pattern framework and just applying it to literally everything. Why are you watching this channel if you didn't like that stuff? In that same vein, though, I don't want to spoil Twin Peaks, but doesn't that shot of her sitting at the foot of the bed kind of remind you of another shot in Twin Peaks? Or maybe it's Fire Walk With Me. Because the fact that I'm like scared shitless rethinking about that scene tells me that that's Fire Walk With Me. I think in this case, it's a coincidence. I would never want to put Mary in the same category as who you could describe as the Moloch Ball of the Twin Peaks universe. I hate how accurate that is. But let's not take for granted a key event that just took place here. Not just the first fight that these two had, but already a separation. Mary leaves Henry saying, I'll do what I want. To me, it feels like almost a reclamation of her agency, control over her own life and her destiny. I'll flesh that out towards the end of the video when we do the final character breakdowns, but it's notable, especially when set aside Henry's continued passivity. It's high time he learned how to take care of his child while on vacation. After a quick scene of the lady across the hall walking out of her flat, Henry and his baby share a look. It's sad, cute, and terrifying, kind of looking to the side at his father. That being said, though, we hear this ominous, vibrating noise. Strange, almost implying something villainous is afoot. Henry stands up and fusses with the larger cabinet or curio. This isn't the small cabinet that he's put that mysterious seed or larva into. He pulls a thermometer out and tests the baby's temperature to see if it's sick. Now, I'm not really sure how to read these types of thermometers, but I think this arrow is meant to be interpreted as a normal temperature. And honestly, my ignorance really adds to the immersion because the naive Henry seems to see this reading as inconclusive or benign until getting jump scared by a brutal sight. I'm gonna have to censor most of these shots of this scene. I don't even think YouTube will have much of a problem with them. I just don't like it. It's sad, it's gross, and every time I see it, it f***s up my day. I can't in good conscience subject any of you to that. If you want to see it so bad, go on Internet Archive. The part that I am censoring is just absolutely disgusting. A strange, mealy mass formed at the bottom of the baby's throat. Maggots, a play on the larval imagery, or maybe pus, a play on the child being seen as a sort of intrusive body in Henry's life, being naturally purged. Well, here's what I won't cover up. Its face is covered in those pocks, much like the man in the planet, that strange lever puller in the beginning of the movie. To me, lending some credence to that character, the man inside the planet being linked to the child. But how? Well, I'm reminded of David Lynch when he referred to Eraserhead as his most spiritual story. What if, in an atemporal way, the man inside the planet is the soul of the adult of the child that would never become? Pulling the lever that started the journey of its own life, knowing that it would be short and painful. If that's the case, then we know where he got those pocks on his face. But where did he get that gash traveling up his chest? Enough pretentious semiotic ruminations. Before us is the culmination of the horror, the unplanned tenfold increase in responsibility from teenhood to adulthood, but with none of the increase in brain power, capability, or life experience, and no help from the adults as well. And so naturally, or unnaturally by the looks of it, the nightmare has reached its obvious next step. The child is dying because its parents too are children. And just like that, the horror ends. The tense music stops, the confusion of Henry is halted by calming winds and a bubbling humidifier. The humor, no pun intended given the purulent imagery, can be digested in two ways. Of course, many young parents are quite familiar with this feeling. For the first time seeing your baby get sick, it's a heartbreaking, terrifying experience. The fear and guilt bubbling within. The mounting medical bills. What's going to happen to my baby? He's just got a cold. Put him under the humidifier. I'm getting to that age. A lot of young parents in my life now. So shout out to all the parents. Shout out to all the pairs. However, the other way we can process this scene, which I think is probably the more accurate interpretation, is this sort of hopeless attempt at fixing such an inconceivably brutal scenario. There before you is innocence personified, a poor baby with its fate sealed by a most gruesome and determined disease. And you are likely not even 2 whole decades older than the child. 2/3 of your life were spent as helpless as the baby, and you're expected to leverage that 1/3 of life experience to save the poor soul from the certainty of death. The horror is evident. There are no right answers, but seeing Henry choose to fix the problem with a humidifier is it's painful, but it's also kind of humorous too, like in a gallows Lynchian way. Now, before, Henry used the thermometer, an implement for health, from his larger cabinet, but after some contemplation, he moves to the small cabinet with the mysterious seed thing. He contemplates. That vibrating noise comes back, but then he closes the cabinet, thinking back to his mailbox. It's in this shot right here where his last name, Spencer, is revealed. Before digging into the possible significance of Henry Spencer's last name, I want to give you a little bit of where I'm at right now regarding this mysterious seed or worm. Now, in the final scene that features this mysterious item, we'll basically have a confirmation that it's this sort of inert larval form that will grow into this worm, and you'll get a really cool little stop-motion scene with it. When I first started working on this project, I was thinking that it was some sort of strange, MacGuffin that represented this desire to, the baby, like a poison of some sort. That's why I was thinking it might have been a seed. Maybe it comes from a poisonous plant. But right before pressing record on that camera, I was in a sort of a belief that it's just a larval representation of reproduction. This will make sense when we'll see the ultimate scene of this worm. It started coming off to me as just a symbol of the inevitability of reproduction, the copying. But now that I stand here, I've kind of gone full circle. I think the fact that it can be mistaken as a seed, like a poisonous seed, and a sort of inert, just about to sprout, just about to grow into a baby worm larva, might be intentional. We'll have to see. This is as last minute of a theory crafting thing that you can get. So let me hold off on giving my final thoughts on that. Let me let it bake for a little bit. In the meantime, let me give you some of the significance to Henry Spencer's last name, or possible significance to his last name. Now, from what I could find online, the name Spencer comes from the role of a dispenser in medieval times, a steward. Now, this is my Skyrim knowledge, but a steward would be somebody who acts as a trusted executive extension of a governing body, someone who addresses some of the more mundane needs of the body's constituents, the peasantry. However, if the connection of Spencer to dispenser to steward is intentional, it could represent the broader theme of a steward, someone who tends to something, typically not of the steward's ownership, like the biblical Joseph, stewarding the Son of God. But even if that's a bit too floppy, then perhaps it's just an ironic name to emphasize Henry's poor stewardship over his child, the horrors taking place while its mother is gone. Alright, enough of this side quest. Obviously there's something being contemplated over this seed or mailbox. When Henry attempted to leave, maybe to obsessively check the mail, the baby begins wailing, almost begging him not to leave. Mary did tell Henry, "You better take good care of him while I'm gone." So Henry feels the head of the baby, and then Henry makes another attempt to leave. The baby wails again, and he returns, and he lifts his hand, but he doesn't check the baby. It's almost like wait, I've already did this. I already know what the head feels like. Like he's just kind of going through the motions of what he thinks a father would do. Like how do I act like a good father? Because he doesn't know how to be a good father. Although, that's a bit harsh because he ultimately makes the right decision. He chooses to stay at the baby's side. Now, why he wanted to go to the mailbox to begin with is beyond me. Maybe he just wanted to see if there was some sort of new trinket waiting for him. Now, in this scene, one thing I noticed is that the baby seems to be kind of sticking its tongue out. Perhaps a sad attempt to kind of dilate the throat muscles and catch gasps of air, but also perhaps an echo of its grandmother's strange behavior at the dinner table. Now, the movie is relentless. Just like that, it's nighttime. The day just flew by with Henry holed up in his apartment, and we can see the poor baby's weakened gaze peer through the slit of light let in from the outside. As Henry lays in bed contemplating, we begin to look between what looks like the grating of the radiator. Inside, we see that strange stage with the light bulbs and hay kind of lining its edge. And here we see... This is the lady in the radiator. Her hairdo, cheeks, and chin very clearly resemble a cloud, specifically a mushroom cloud. The fact that she's in the radiator also helps. What this possible nuclear theme might mean, I'm not too sure. The phantom of the nuclear family, the desire to wipe the slate clean, start over again? Or it's the start to David Lynch's affinity for using atomic bombs and nuclear bombs as motifs in his media. Although, again, I'm only really thinking of Twin Peaks. There's a picture of, I believe, the Trinity bomb testing hanging in the FBI office in Twin Peaks: The Return. And I think we actually see that same exact picture in a later scene, like in a dream sequence, or later in this current dream sequence. It's funny, when I usually make these kind of like artsy-fartsy whiteboards where it's just kind of like, it cuts to something kind of nice looking, I always have to kind of use the space, use the real estate, and I didn't have anything prepared for this lower right corner, so I thought to draw Judy from the Return. I mean, think about it. Lady in the radiator, lady in the radiation. Yeah. Ooh, gosh. And you know, there's actually some stuff in... I'm definitely... you can compare Henry to a certain character, that's all I can say. You already know who I'm talking about. But that's not really Judy coded, though. That's like... Bob coded? I mean, am I really spoiling it? These are just names. They're just saying names. And there's multiple Bobs in the series, so you don't know which one I'm talking about. You know what? Fuck it, I'm gonna say it. It's been long enough. I can spoil shit. Okay? Iron Man? It's actually Tony Stark. Now, I don't know how to describe this, but I find the lady in the radiator comforting, funny, and infuriating all at the same time. Like, the strange side steps, the clasped hands, the shrugs, and the smile gestures. It's so odd. She's built like a Hylix character. Anyways, sperm-like beings are falling from above, and she steps over them, and then... atop them. This could be a wet dream, a nocturnal emission, or maybe a dream about, like, abortions, but the inverse side of it. The spermicidal dance paired with the atomic motifs, invoking a sense of wiping the slate clean, wanting to be not a father. Go back to simpler times of irresponsibility. Or perhaps not to go back, but just for all of it to end. I'm gonna hold off on fleshing out my thoughts on the lady in the radiator until her big In Heaven musical number. For now, let's just keep in mind her sort of atomic motif. When I was searching online for images from the movie to, for possible thumbnail ideas, I saw quite a few images comparing, the not profile, I guess the silhouette, the outline of the lady in the radiator to mushroom clouds. So, if the discourse has gotten to that point already, then that tells us we need to go a little bit deeper. Or attempt to go a little bit deeper. Right now, I'm just considering the mushroom cloud as just a symbol of oblivion. The end of the world, the idea of seeing the ceasing of life as a sort of peace. A peace that precedes a blank slate. When you're in a position similar to Henry or Mary, suicidal ideation certainly is something that you might struggle with, but it could be something a bit broader than that. When you realize that you can't go back, that the only way to end the unpleasant scenario, well, is just to end, period. Doesn't necessarily have to be taking one's own life. It could be other dire or drastic actions that further spiral you downwards. However, I think we can go a bit deeper. It just now occurs to me And I'll see if I can flesh this out by the end of this video. But if you notice, the sperm cells sort of drop from above and impact the ground. And when she stomps on them, she is quite literally that mushroom plume rising from that impact, a product of the bomb being dropped on Henry's life. And so, while I think it's still very accurate to see her as this symbol of oblivion, this sort of spermicidal dance that kind of signifies a desire to destroy this thing that upended your life, we can still also liken it to the news itself, the pregnancy itself being the bomb that has dropped on Henry and Mary's life, bringing oblivion to the simplicity of their youth. I know I said I was going to wait till the In Heaven musical number to flesh out my thoughts on The Lady in the Radiator, but that kind of more or less are my thoughts. There's still more to flesh out, but that more or less is the shape of it. But wait, there's more. Now this is a bit of a late realization, but the music that's playing during this debut of The Lady in the Radiator is a song called Stompin' the Bug by the aforementioned Fats Waller. Stomping the Bug, an apt tune for her Gumit stomping. When I found this song on YouTube, I suddenly remembered why I was able to so quickly realize the atomic imagery of the Lady in the Radiator's head. This record was recorded by Trinity Church Studios. The link? Trinity nuclear bomb testing. But I didn't even come up with that on my own. Somewhere deep in the comments of some obscured Twin Peaks video, one of countless I've mindlessly consumed during 2021 and 22, somebody pointed out that the church that played the Lady in the Radiator song was Trinity Church, evoking the Trinity bomb testing. I remember reading this and looking into it and being like, this guy is off the goop. In Heaven is an original song for Eraserhead, but no, they were talking about Stompin' the Bug. What a throwback. Shout out to whoever that was. While I'm here, in case you're wondering, my favorite videos on Twin Peaks would have to be RIP_Cinema's analysis, but I also love Cornpone Films series on Twin Peaks as well. Like if you want the flawed Peacock take on Twin Peaks, just watch RIP_Cinema's video. But if you want the flawed Peacock treatment, on specifically Twin Peaks The Return, definitely watch Cornpone Films. Them some good eating there. I love that series. I freaking love it so much. You know, on a subconscious level, that might be what kind of inspired some of the choices I make making these videos, you know. So big shout out to Cornpone. The scene ends with the Lady in the Radiator shuffling back. We open up on the next scene with a very deliberate pathway, starting on that little cabinet with a strange seed inside it and panning over to that barren sapling on Henry's nightstand. I'm gonna be honest, I keep flipping back and forth on that seed and what it means to me. You'll see why in a moment. We have a pretty funny drawn-out scene of Henry and Mary fighting over the bed's real estate, although we shouldn't take for granted that out of nowhere Mary is back. And I think this is the last scene we'll get of her. Like, since she's ran off, we have just this scene and that's it. And there's even some implication of a coming dream. First off, Mary is chattering her teeth, reminding me a lot of, nighttime bruxism, grinding and clenching your teeth during sleep, usually from stress. I'm not sure where Chris is right now with the floundering about of these sequences, but we'll come to learn that this scene specifically, Henry waking up in the bed, we see Mary chattering her teeth. It's a false waking up. It's still part of the larger dream sequence. And I think it's very fitting that you've got that sort of the chattering within the dream sequence. It's not so much a dream motif though. I mean, it kind of is. I can't imagine. I can't tell you how many times Dream World Chris has lost teeth. You wake up and like you have a full mouth of teeth again, and it's like it's the one time where like the dream world bad thing happening, like being reversed when you wake up, it's like not satisfying. I'm like, fuck, stop having these dreams. You know, like you wake up from a dream and you're like, oh, thank God I have my car keys. Oh, thank God my car is in, it's always cars and car keys. Oh, thank God I don't have to go to school again. But the teeth, fuck, I hate the teeth. Crashing out just thinking about it. However, another reason you could argue that this sequence is a sort of a dreamlike, separate, meta-symbolic, I don't know, kind of scene, is because of what it builds up to. After telling Mary to move over multiple times, Henry feels something. These umbilical, strange nodules with long tails, perhaps a manifestation of those sperm cells in the Lady of the Radiator sequence. It looks like he's pulling them from Mary. And the specific way these shots show her kind of shuffling in her sheets evokes kind of two legs or maybe even a vulva. I think in an absurd or abstract way, we are seeing a nightmare of Henry's getting Mary pregnant again. Like no matter what he does, his life keeps slipping between his hands and things just get more and more complicated. I'm doing a piss job at explaining it, but if you get it, you get it. Or if we want to be more simple, this could just be the continuity of the Lady in the Radiator sort of nocturnal emission sequence. This could also be maybe like a nightmarish depiction of Mary just sort of printing these things out, that the strange-looking baby is not human, but immaculately or asexually reproduced from Mary. But I'm going about this the wrong way. If we just take a step back, tilt our head, kind of blur our vision a bit, and we could better see the shape of the overall angst of losing control, tied to an unplanned, unwanted station of parenthood. In other words, all of the above. Simple enough. But this takes us to that small curio. A small spotlight emphasizes its opening, and we see this strange little larva from the tiny black box skittering off in like a stop-motion manner, crawling into what looks like that planet from the beginning. Each time it crawls into one of the pores of the planet, it gets slightly bigger and bigger. I think it's safe to say that we are still in a sort of dream sequence, starting from the Lady in the Radiator scene. However, from the scene in the bed to this planet, I think it's been an obvious enough depiction of what was the start of Henry's horror. A conception that took place without his realizing, and the seed germinating within the planet, the ovum, until it consumes Henry, taking us deeper into the nightmare. Now, it's hard to tell what's going on here. Are we in the belly of this little worm? Are we in the planet? The room that Henry seems to be encased in seems to be dirt-like, somewhat resembling that rocky planet. We see an image of a mushroom cloud behind him, solidifying a hint towards the Lady in the Radiator and what she might be representing. We then see Henry fussing with his pants, specifically his knee, which is odd. The father says, "Look at my knees, look at my knees." And we also see Mary rubbing her knees when she was convulsing. Not sure, but yes, after he fusses with his pants, he responds to a knock at the door. And after searching in the darkness, we have the culmination of the nocturnal emission, a Lilith-like figure. She says she's locked herself out of her room, and then enters Henry's abode. Is Henry being seduced? Is he just going with the flow, as he's been doing from the beginning of this film? The baby cries, and Henry almost instinctually grabs its face to silence it. It could be a sort of "don't ruin this for me" kind of moment, but it could be something more trance-like, as if he's like enthralled. Real quick though, I have to point out how confusing the environment has been. We were just inside that little rabbit warren looking pocket dimension, and now we're back in the apartment. Mary was just gone, then she was back, but then now she's gone again.
Where's your wife?
She must have gone back to her parents again.
While the movie as a whole has always had this sort of odd dreamlike aesthetic, it's at this point where we kind of start to go warp speed with the dreamlike logic. After taking care of his kid, Henry goes to sleep, and he starts his dream off with that stomping the bug lady in the radiator sequence. After that, we see Henry supposedly wake up from that dream, but it's a fake out. I would argue the first hint being Mary being uncharacteristically back so soon, which on its own is a very dream logic kind of thing. You know, people that are familiar being in places they're not supposed to be. But even if that's just floppiness, we get the confirmation that this is a nightmare when the bed becomes infested with those little sperm nodule monsters. Henry throws these big gametes at the wall right next to that small curio. That's where we see for the first time that little larva move. It crawls off into the shadows of the curio, and then it finds its way on the ovum meatball egg planet. And essentially what we see is sort of a symbolic stop-motion pregnancy. You've got this little larva kind of feeding off of the porous planet, growing bigger and bigger until it quite literally consumes Henry. Just as this baby, this new station in life, has consumed his life. And then suddenly Henry is inside the meatball planet, or perhaps inside some dirt or something, and then like his surroundings slowly become, just not even slowly, It's not slowly or suddenly, it's just dreamlike. It's just, he's in that weird dirt pit thing and then he's suddenly in his apartment. It's so cool. It's just a very wonderfully done dream sequence. The reason why I'm even saying all of this is because this second half is uniquely confusing, and I think it's a lot less confusing when you realize, oh, like it's supposed to be because it's a dream. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It just means, actually, if anything, when it comes to David Lynch, it means it matters more. Sorry, got kind of sidetracked there. So, the neighbor asks him where his wife is. He looks confused, positing that maybe she went back to her parents' place again. I think he's just trying to make sense of this dream logic. Now, he's physically silencing his baby, physically hostile towards it for the first time in this whole movie, tempted to cheat on his wife and prevent the baby from getting in the way, much like it did that previous scene, preventing Henry from going downstairs to check the mail. On the other hand, when the neighbor asks to spend the night, there's no arousal across Henry's face. It's still very much fear, like from the beginning. He's like a leaf in the wind, going through the motions, unable to prevent the direction of his flight through this nightmare. The two are seen kissing, bare. Of course, a tame prelude to intercourse. However, the bed has transformed into this crater with a milky mist, not unlike the crater in the beginning of the movie on that planet, the one that the sperm fell into. There's a gut-twisting nature to this. If we abandon the Lilith seducer/predator angle, Henry is cheating on his wife, while his sick child cries out for him. Just isolating Henry as a character, this is clearly his crossing of a very dire Rubicon. Because you see, when the baby cries, the neighbor is the one who kind of looks to the side in horror like, wait, what the F is that? And Henry is the one to kind of push her face back towards him. Again, if we look at this big picture, of course, you've got an older, more experienced woman taking advantage of a young man, or maybe even a boy, but I think that's missing the point of this scene. Up until now, Henry has been a leaf in the wind, but now he's getting with a woman with more experience. A beautiful woman, not an awkward girlfriend. He's drunk with lust, focusing in on his current whims, neglecting his child. It's the first real choice he's made in the movie, and it's a very bad one. The two sink into the strange milky liquid, and then we see the neighbor in that windy darkness, bearing witness to that big meatball planet. I believe this indicates that Henry didn't disengage. He didn't take a page out of the book of Onan of Judah, if you catch my drift. However, there's a look of fear in her eyes. I can see this in a couple of ways. We will later see the neighbor take a strange man into her apartment. There's this sort of randy nature to the rendezvous. This could imply that she is a sex worker, but I mean, maybe she just does it for the love of the game. But despite her higher level of life experience, romantic experience, she's in the locus of this strange boy, or at the very least, strange young man's whole messed up situation. There's like a bitter humor in that she, a woman who has seen much, an experienced person, is put off by the decisions made by, and by extension, made for this young man. Like, this might come off the wrong way, but it's almost like she's like looking to the side, seeing the baby and being like, gee, I know I'm one to talk, but you really should sort your shit out, man, kind of thing. Perhaps the look of horror on her face indicates some sort of karmic punishment for sleeping with somebody so much younger than her, with so much less experience than her, in such a vulnerable state. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I think right now where I'm standing, the most likely scenario is that the reason why the neighbor is seeing the meatball planet is because a conception took place. A conception that the neighbor is not in the market for. The scene fades out and we're lightly startled by the lady in the radiator singing In Heaven, the most famous scene of this movie. The lyrics are, in heaven, everything is fine. You've got your good things and I've got mine. And then, in heaven, everything is fine. I've got your good things and you've got mine. So a fusion, a mixture of substances and essences. A child is made up of the good things of the father and mother, something like that. Way back in the day, I remember reading some passing comment on this scene and song, theorizing that this might represent Henry contemplating taking his own life. In heaven, this phantom beckoning. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. It's represented by an atomic cloud, a decision made that leads to oblivion. Something to consider as we let the scene develop. The music ends with a whistly, windy noise, foreshadowing the white realm that the baby comes from and where this movie ultimately goes. For the first time, we see Henry inside the radiator, climbing atop the stage and approaching the lady. She holds her hands out for him, offering something or awaiting something to be given to her. He doesn't really grab her hands, he doesn't place anything in them, he just sort of weakly touches her hands, like just lightly grasping them with a few fingers. The scene goes white. He's startled and then he grabs her again, the scene goes white again, and she playfully kind of clasps her hands away from him. Then suddenly disappearing. Did he make a deal with her? Did he fail to accept an offer? Or was she just simply showing him what heaven looked like? And when he got a taste of everything being fine, he tried greedily double dipping. Not sure. Nonetheless, the movie is about to start reaching peak weirdness. I was going to take this time to give my final thoughts on the lady in the radiator and the neighbor across the hall. However, I think it's best that we let the plot fully form. Let it develop to the end. For now, just to give you kind of a taste, keep in mind the very nocturnal emission-y, wasted seed kind of concept that has been coursing through that set of dream sequences. From the spermicidal dance of the lady in the radiator to the very Lilith-coded character of this dream world neighbor across the hall. Just keep that in mind. But even now I'm moving too fast. Let's see this dream through. The lady in the radiator is gone, but here stands Henry. Trapped? Well, he's flanked by these curtains, standing atop black and white flooring. If this were Twin Peaks, he'd be in the Black Lodge. A look of fear crawls across his face. He looks sick. Then we get silently jump-scared by the man inside the planet. He scowls at Henry. There's like a hateful look. And while there is a slight upturn in his mouth, a smile, it's likely just forced like that because of this man's untreated malady. Because of the baby's untreated malady. Henry is seeing the man that his child will never come to be, atemporally judging him. Judging him for what? Well, I kind of just spoiled it. Well, Henry shakes his head, almost saying no, but it's kind of interrupted by this befuddled head bobbing. He looks down to see the discarded gametes fly across the checkered floor, another spermicidal display. Or perhaps his wish coming true, the mistake being reversed. But at what cost? In comes a rock or pile of something, with that sapling growing out of it. Did it grow, or is it just so big because Henry scaled down to fit in the radiator? I mean, out of all the spitting images in this movie, this one's probably the most spit-worthy. You've got this large, sort of like, I don't know if I'm misusing the term, deciduous, like leafless tree. And it's in an environment with checkered flooring, curtains, which is nuts. If you've seen Twin Peaks: The Return, this is basically the arm, but without the head. Yet. More on that in a second. Perhaps the arm will get his head in a moment. Henry walks over to this pulpit-looking thingy. It's got this rail on it that I believe is meant to be the rail of the foot of the bed. Not sure, though. He fusses with it, desperately rotating it. Perhaps a desire to reverse the reversal. Or maybe just something about cycles. Damn, I kind of thought this would be a lot easier. Actually, maybe the cycle angle might be it, because... a phallic worm pops Henry's head off. It rolls onto the ground. The tree starts to bleed, and in the place of the headless Henry's neck grows the head of his baby, almost implying a repetition of history, the child inheriting the anxieties and trauma of the dad. Ooh, I say here, not sure, but maybe it's like a coping thing. He's telling himself if the baby is allowed to continue, it's only going to end up like me, kind of thing. I think that's what this is. Even if my micro-interpretations are incorrect, ultimately this is the culmination of Henry's angst turned into desire. A desire to erase his mind, his being, everything that looms over him. His running from the phantom of fertility, his running towards this siren of a clean slate, and this spermicidal desire to abort mission. His head falls through the pool of blood from the tree and teleports into the outside. The top of his head sticks to the floor, and as the rest of it tips over, his brain or skull is revealed. But something is off. A child scavenger swoops in to greedily secure Henry's craniotomied head and takes it to a local business to pawn it off. For what purpose, we'll see. The front desk associate of this business seems to react with some urgency, as if the child has brought a good haul. He starts repeatedly ringing the buzzer until a manager or higher up barges in.
Okay, Paul!
The tall guy sees what's in the kid's hands and changes his tune, happy to see this brutalized, severed head. He takes the kid into the next room to process this scrap. The front desk guy tries to follow.
Counter, Paul!
I don't know what the hell all that's about. It's very like Three Stooges coded. The kid turns in his haul and the technician drills a hole into the skull, only to reveal that it isn't a skull, but a hunk of rubber inside the head where a brain should be. He places the stick of rubber into a machine and you guessed it. Henry's brain is used to make erasers on the ends of pencils, which, the more I think about it, the more I find it so funny. Erasers are made of the gray matter of men whose minds are so mired in regret that their very brains become the desire to undo, become erasers. It's funny, the more I think about just the implication of the eraser to rubber to condom sort of linking, and the fact that the title of the movie is called Eraserhead, we're basically calling Henry a dickhead, which is not justifiable yet. However, like last minute, I just realized this as I was kind of just meditating on the intro of the movie. I was trying to dig so deep to get to the core that I forgot to appreciate the crust, the surface level interpretation. If you remember, the movie opens, the title card opens with the side of Henry's head going up and down, kind of drifting up and down above that sort of egg, ovum, meatball planet. I was so poised to trying to find a deeper meaning that I realized I overlooked the obvious. It's an eraser. You're literally rubbing off, trying to erase the egg planet, or perhaps erase what's going on inside the egg planet. This is one scene, but it's depicting two different things, two different diametrically opposed concepts: conception and regret, creation and destruction. I am a printer that works at Lapel's factory, to becoming a golem of pure desire to undo, becoming the physical manifestation, at least in the dream world, of the eraser head. While we haven't seen the final sort of conclusion of this transformation, I wanted to point out I don't think it's a coincidence that everything seems to quicken within this dream sequence. It's as if the trajectory of Henry, the trajectory of the story of Eraserhead from the beginning has been to run from this reality of creation, the phantom of fertility, and running towards this sweet, cold embrace of this siren of erasure, chasing after this dream of oblivion. Without getting too much into the behind-the-scenes stuff, I kind of messed up the sequencing of the whiteboard, so there's a little bit of a spoiler here. And because of that, I've messed up the real estate of this whiteboard, so just this is supposed to represent the eraser company. Like if I try to draw anything else, my arm is just going to smudge everything. Now, while I've more or less given my thoughts on the broader meaning of the eraser in Eraserhead, that still leaves this strange eraser company. So what's their purpose? The Eraser Company to me sort of strike me as this progenitor of David Lynch's affinity for like these dream world backrooms factions. Characters or even groupings of characters that operate behind the scenes of the realities that he's crafted. Like in Twin Peaks, you have the various characters in the Black Lodge. You have the, what did they say? Dirty, bearded men that live in a convenience store on top of a gas station or something like that. Or no, they live on top of the convenience store. There are certainly some pocket dimensions to Inland Empire. You kind of have something similar in Mulholland Drive. It's not really like factions. It's more just like different, equally plausible alternate realities, with a little bit of like mixing in the dreamlike aspects, maybe. But yes, when it comes to the Eraser Company, to me, they're sort of just like a treat, an occasion to kind of show us what's going on in the outside of our protagonist's personal dream world. What's going on in kind of like the back rooms of this movie? The pencil technician, pencil pusher, eraser pusher, tests out the freshly topped pencil, giving it the seal of approval.
It's okay.
I don't know why.
It's okay.
Because for some reason...
It's okay.
I can't, it's just so funny, the way he says, it's okay, it's
okay.
It's like stupid. It's not even, there's funnier things to focus on, to find funny in this movie. After the head is turned in, the kid is paid. The rubber dustings are swept off of the table, transitioning into this fantastic windy scene. The scene transitions to Henry in his bed. It seems that all of that was not a nightmare or a dream, a story being told through a dream. Some of it not happening, some of it actually happening. Just don't think too much about the continuity of stuff, okay? Everything that we just witnessed is very relevant. Henry gets up, ponders on the bed frame bar, perhaps trying to make sense of his dream, what it was trying to tell him. He ponders on his empty bed, and then he sees a mugging or assault happening outside. Bleak world. We can also see that the baby is still swaddled, alive, and from the looks of it, the pox has subsided. Real quick, I just want to take this moment to chart out that whole dream sequence that we went through, or at least the second half. But while I'm here, I just realized something when I was drawing this. Might be a coincidence, though. The sort of creases of the curtains kind of remind me a bit of the piping of a radiator. I don't know. That might be the reason why David Lynch chose a radiator, or maybe David Lynch chose the curtains in the radiator, or it could be a coincidence and I'm just literally just inspired from my shitty doodles. Anyway, so yes, I'm operating on this theory that now that Henry has woken up, he's out of that dream. However, there is evidence, especially the penultimate scene of this movie, that we are still in the nightmare. He hears some noises, opens the door, does a whole bunch of hesitating, and then knocks on the door of his neighbor of whom he just slept with. Again, I know you're thinking, well, that was just a dream. Isn't it all just a dream? She doesn't answer. When he walks back in, he hears the baby begin to raspily cackle, mocking his father for his folly. But this could also be just some coughing, not sure. During the second go-around, it really starts to sound less like cackling and just sick coughs. Poor guy. As Henry tries to drift off and catch on to the peaceful music of the radiator, he is distracted by some nearby noise, and the baby again starts its wheezing, but this time it sounds unmistakably like cackling. Does the baby know what's about to happen? Getting the last laugh? Well, Henry again stirs from some noise coming from the hallway. We see a shot of the little cabinet, and then the lights, and then the radiator, and then outside, until he hears the elevator arrive to his floor. Perhaps he opens his door anticipating Mary, or anticipating the neighbor, but he sees this. This shot is so funny. Okay, let me go ahead and say what I think is happening. We're right at the end anyways. When Henry and the neighbor had their physical encounter, I believe that they did conceive. But she decided to get an abortion. She saw the state of the child that's in Henry's home, and she probably had her own lifestyle and desires that she wanted to keep going. She wasn't going to let this one-night stand upend her life. And so, when she sees Henry's face, she sees maybe the child, either feeling guilt for her abortion, or perhaps associating Henry with the naivete of a child. But look at this from Henry's perspective. He sees the lady that he slept with, without a care in the world. Nothing has changed for her since they slept together. And she could just choose to get an abortion. It's almost frustrating. Why didn't I have that option? Why don't I get that choice? Of course, because it's not Henry's womb that's growing the baby, but nonetheless, it's a valid frustration from the perspective of the leaf in the wind child or teen or young adult. It's not fair. Why don't I have that option? Well, it might be too late for contraceptives. It might be too late for the morning after pill, too late for an abortion, but it isn't too late for infanticide. Henry grabs a pair of scissors and cuts the medical gauze swaddle from the feet to the neck, revealing that this wasn't just like swaddling clothes, this was a protective membrane. The innards of the baby have been exposed. Henry realizes that this was only a half measure, that he's only making the baby suffer, so he identifies these little lungs and stabs at them. And, of course, the baby dies. If you really want to see the gory details, watch the movie. Come to think of it, this infanticide kind of plays out in a very dreamlike way. You see, there's this nature to Henry's fate, this sort of aimless sort of leaf in the wind. And this scene kind of plays out with these like gusts of intention. You know, like he grabs the scissor, he like just impulsively cuts the gauze, and then he sees what's going on, he stabs. Like he's like, it's not just, what have I done? I have to stop the suffering. There is that element, but it's just like, problems arise, and all of a sudden now he's trying to fix problems and overcorrect, and it's so nightmarish. And I don't know, I've had a shit ton of dreams like this. That's why it really sticks out to me as very dreamlike. I say all that because even though I'm operating on interpreting this as just sort of an actual event, regardless of dream or not, if you're a dream purist, if you're like a dream truther, I think that's some good evidence in your camp. You know, put that feather in your pipe and smoke it. While the poor kid succumbs to its wounds, a strange pile of mealy sludge rises from within. There's so much of it that it's impossible for the baby to have contained all that sludge. Kind of reminded me of that Whitest Kids You Know Alien Autopsy skit. But instead of Skittles, it's a cream of wheat. Oh. Or maybe it's Garmonbosia. Maybe. Maybe this is like a proto-Garmonbosia. So, Garmonbosia, it's been a while since I've really dug into Twin Peaks, so I'm probably gonna have a flawed retelling of what this even is. It's basically like, throughout Twin Peaks, there's this repetition of creamed corn. And it's kind of like this food symbol that kind of represents like a bad omen, misfortune, pain. My personal theory is it's like an inverse to ambrosia, Garmonbosia. Instead of it being a nectar of the gods or nectar, like manna from heaven, it's this sort of sludge of suffering. I think it actually is like a physical manifestation of suffering. I've actually read some theories in my comment section whenever I bring up Garmonbosia, which is, that's just a funny concept that comes up. That's Twin Peaks. It's kind of like an industrialized, bastardized form of corn, which is an otherwise sacred staple food for indigenous people. But I like to think that it's just because David Lynch fucking hates cream corn. What would my Garmonbosia be? Baba ganoush? Mayonnaise? You know, water chestnuts? Bah. This final horrifying sequence plays out like a sort of deserved comeuppance to Henry. The consequences to his failures, his lack of control, etc. He flees to the corner, averting his eyes. We see the pile of meaty sludge build up just off camera, slowly spreading up past the baby's neck. You would think it's about to get smothered by it, but then we see the horrifying mound of which this pile has built up to, and the neck of the baby elongating out of it, trying to break free of the mound, its long neck now resembling the sort of umbilical cord-like tail of the sperm cell. In a strange way, its final form is much like its initial form. All while this is happening, we see like a hole, possibly a broken power outlet wiring thingy. It's hard to tell. It looks like there's like wires hanging out of like a light bulb or something. I don't know. Nonetheless, the sparks are menacing. Even more so when we realize that they're meant to be juxtaposed by the spurts of fluid coming from the mouth of the long-necked child, like its own bile is an accelerant. The lights are blinking, Henry is horrified, and the baby's neck is trying to break free, and I believe it does break free, because It goes on a bit like this. The torment continues until the huge head of the child lunges for Henry, and then the camera focuses in on the light bulb of that lamp and the power goes out. Death? I interpret this as everything sort of pausing right as the child is about to get its revenge. It kind of looks like it's almost frozen mid-lunge. Henry, confused, looks away, then hears a noise. He's in that dark realm. Before him is the planet, and he looks on horrified as the planet explodes, breaking apart bit by bit. Behind Henry are those eraser shavings. He perhaps is in the realm of death, of non-existence, made up of defragmented memories, forms, the shavings of which used to be. The scene seems to almost resemble what the neighbor went through after she laid with Henry. Seeing the egg planet looking fearful, but the difference is that Henry's planet breaks open. We slowly enter the whole of the planet and see the man inside the planet. There's rage, there's satisfaction. He's laughing at Henry, laughing at his folly. I truly do believe that this is the soul of the child. He pulled the lever that started the movie, and he gets to pull the lever that ends it. However, the violent overdoing of the pulling, the sparks and stuff, to me indicates that he's sort of breaking the machine, getting his revenge. In a way, it feels like because he was the one to make the decision to pull the lever, that means it was his decision as to whether or not to ensoul the baby form. And when he saw how Henry would kill him, he also sees how his conception, the pregnancy, makes Henry suffer and leads to his demise. And so he pulls the lever to set off the events that would lead to both of their deaths as like punishment for like his murder, like before the fact. That's kooky. That's so kooky. Like imagine you could see into the future. All the various paths you can take materialize before you. All of them mundane, just, varying levels of bliss and pain and whatnot. But one sticks out to you. You're on a hike with your father, and while you're not aware, he pulls out a weapon and kills you instantly. You're thinking, what the hell? Why did he do that? Why would he betray me so? Well, you keep watching this fate pan out. He walks down the path, he trips, falls down a hill, and paralyzes himself. There he suffers for 6, 7, or 8 days, slowly, starving to death. So he suffers a karmic end to killing one's own child. Now that's just one path. You know how to avoid it, and all the other paths are totally fine. But you just can't get out of your head the fact that this guy would just betray you like that. He would kill you for no reason. And so you're so fucking pissed that he would hypothetically do that you choose that route. Fuck it. I don't mind dying if it means that fucker gets to pay for what he hypothetically did to me. Or I guess will now do to me. That's how I interpret the man inside the planet. The puller of the lever. He chose the nuclear option in his own arbitrarily begotten trolley conundrum. Am I right? Probably not. But if I can make it compelling enough, people will at least find it entertaining. That's the secret of YouTube theory crafting in the end. Now, apologies for sort of hogging the scene so close to the ending. Let's pick it up a little bit before where we left off. So we see the reveal of the man inside the planet. Of course, there's only so much the vengeful soul of the infanticided infant can execute. For, in heaven, everything is fine. For everyone. On top of being all white, a stark contrast to the dark as hell movie, we hear almost a choral noise, like a cross between very high winds and a choir. I think this is definitely how 1970s budding director Lynch would depict heaven. And listen, is it me, or does the way that the radiator ladies kind of glide look kind of freaky as hell? Like, I'm comfortable interpreting this as a sort of unsatisfying or dull happy ending. That's dullness is almost a mercy to the high-octane angst of the hellish movie, but there's also something kind of sinister about her here. But I don't think that's intentional. There's a warmth to her hugging Henry. There's a peace across his face for the first time in the movie. Or I guess the second time since, he bumped uglies. Is that a euphemism? Is that an innuendo, bumping uglies? But it's for certain the only time we've ever seen him truly rest. Enough of me keeping the scene hostage. Here's how the movie truly completes. And just like that, the movie ends. The credits roll, and like I said, it's a dull ending, but it's mercifully dull. The music playing is Fats Waller's Stompin' the Bug, again taking us back to the lady in the radiator stomping the gametes. But yes, that's Eraserhead. Before giving my final thoughts on Eraserhead, let's take a breather over some wonderful fan art. Starting off, we have a piece that oddly hit me in a nostalgic way. I mean, it hasn't been a long time since our trek across Rusty Lake, and yet this brought me back in a special way. Thank you to Burn-Mirage on Tumblr for the honor of placing me in the position of proprietor of Rusty Lake Hotel. Up next is a phenomenal graphic evoking the occult logo of Paratopic. Thank you to AWOL for getting my gears turning with this awesome piece. It's got me thinking of some possible directions I can take future skits. Up next, we've got my favorite tarot card, the Hanged Man, with the skull of a peacock, composed by Project_Menu on Instagram, with various feathers decorated with motifs based on the topics I've covered. Big shout out. If there's a hidden benefit to these smaller rapid-fire videos, it's that they populate the catalog with more possible motifs to inspire more people's creativity. But nothing's got the mimetic staying power that Who's Lila brings. Big thank you to Suzuroy on Blue Sky for this kick-ass comic depicting Lila's resurgence in the No I'm Not Human video. What a sentence. Big thank you to all the fan artists. If I forgot to shout you out or you have fan art questions, suggestions, and whatnot, the only way to get it to me is email. That's flawpeacock222@gmail.com. I don't use social media, email is king. And then finally, big thanks to Fawn Waldron for the first poem submission I've received on this channel, titled Gettin' Floppy. Also thank you to my sister for providing the dirbec I'll be using to garnish the beat poetry. I deposit an idea that I find, I am saving it for later, a million thoughts to keep in mind, the mark of an investigator. I hear mimetic whispers and find defunct power companies. I meet ephemeral figures and discover tragic immortalities. The tarot deck holds no turmoil, and demonology is no match for me. I scratch away at the undersoil and find all that there is to see. While some may say my ideas are, at best, floppy, there's nothing, not even death, that can stop me. Wonderful, thank you. And now, back to the video. There are different levels of using dreams in pieces of media. Sometimes the dream is just a fake out. It's just sort of like a kooky or spooky scene for a main character, then they wake up and none of it matters, it's not relevant, it's basically just like a filler scene. In some cases, they can be used to explore the deeper insecurities of a character, the angst of a character, what they fear, but it's still a very clear-cut, easy to single out sequence of a piece of media. A small dream scene in a larger, real waking world movie or plot. In some cases, we fully lean into the dream aspect. Silent Hill is a big example. I don't know if it's necessarily like a dream world, but it's a dream-like world. Nightmare world, of course. In those cases, in the case of like Silent Hill, for example, the dream world, it might be a dream world, might be this fantastical nightmare realm, but it ultimately is real because it's exploring something that is real. There's a reality, a bareness, a hard truth to it. But then you get David Lynch stuff. We go from dreams are dreams, reality is reality, to dreams are reality as well as reality being reality. But here, it's both reality and the dreams are a dream. Okay, clearly I'm having a tough time explaining David Lynch and his whole dream thing. Far smarter people have explained it, so let me just oversimplify. Forget about the rest of David Lynch's catalog. Let's just focus in on Eraserhead. One key characteristic in this movie is that there is dreamlike oddity in the waking scenes, and there is very real, hard kind of truths in the dream scenes. But it's all housed in absurdity. For this reason, let's not get bogged down in trying to figure out, okay, what actually took place, what's in a dream, what's for real. It's all a dream. And yet, despite that, it's still telling an all the more real and potent story. So let's go ahead and do a very quick comb through and just reappraise some key scenes now that we've reached the end. The title card scene, of course, is a conception. I interpret the long-winded sort of wandering scenes as the 7 to 9 month period that Mary went no contact with Henry because, of course, she was pregnant. She didn't know how to break the news to him. I think that's why he seems so nervous. That's why there's a sort of depressing nature to it. He doesn't know if they're broken up. He sort of maybe or assumed that they've broken up. That's why he has the torn photo. And it would explain why he's so kind of not vexed, but just like caught off guard when his neighbor tells him that he's been invited to his coming parent-in-law's house for dinner. Fast forwarding to the dinner, the news is broken to him. They have an off-camera shotgun wedding. And then we first meet the kid, and it's in that scene that we have our first mystery, that strange box that was delivered to Henry. The larva is clearly delivered to Henry as some sort of source of temptation. He hides it from Mary, lies about not getting mail. We hear that ominous vibration in a scene where we sort of anticipate Henry, using it, however that would look. And the fact that Henry is obsessed with checking his mail since he received this larva, points to some sort of temptation. So this would have you thinking that this is some sort of mythical item or poison that can be used to kill his offspring. However, in this larva's ultimate scene, it sort of just becomes another symbol of conception. It ceases its inert state, actually moves, and infiltrates that meatball ovum planet. So what is it? Why did Henry receive this? Why is it such a source of fixation and apparent temptation? Here's my theory, and I admit it's pretty stretchy. When we see Henry get up from bed, specifically when Mary first leaves, that is when we hear that ominous vibration noise. We're meant to see Henry as being tempted by whatever that larva or seed represents. I think that with Mary gone, with the child's sickness imminently reaching deadly levels, Henry had the opportunity to sort of let the problem take care of itself. That's what the larva kind of represents to me. But Henry makes the correct choice and takes care of his son. He resists that temptation. We see this quite literally. He chooses that big cabinet over the small curio, grabbing a thermometer instead. We can see the choice of grabbing the thermometer as a choice to accept fatherhood. It's the first action that Henry does in this movie, and it's inherently paternal. And so that makes a sudden turn towards murder at the end all the more jarring and horrifying. Now, my interpretation is quite flawed. It presupposes a very twisted and incoherent moral framework in the movie that somehow, like, if he let the baby die, that would be, like, the right choice. Actually, not really, because it's... Okay, if we had to moralize, it would be kind of like he took care of the baby. Good choice. But then he sort of backslides and gives up at the end. Bad choice. But that's not what we're doing. We're not here to moralize necessarily. What I'm trying to do really is just understand the flow of consequences in Eraserhead. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the larva is received, Henry lives, Mary leaves, the baby gets super sick. And while I would argue that the dream starts with the bug stomping lady in the radiator scene, you could argue the sort of sudden nature to the baby getting sick. Henry turns around, turns back, suddenly he's covered in pox and has the mess inside of his mouth. That's very dreamlike. But again, regardless, it's all housed in absurdity. The first dream scene is, of course, that debut of the lady in the radiator stomping the bugs. You've got that fake out wake up with said bugs appearing in Henry's bed. You've got this stop motion larva fertilizing the planet. And then finally, the rendezvous with the neighbor. This is one of those scenarios where we got to avoid getting bogged down in the splitting of hairs between dreams and reality and just take it all in. The first 3 segments of the dream can more or less be categorized as depicting Henry's loss or lack of control, establishing these gametes as an infestation of his life. Now, I'm about to contradict myself because the neighbor rendezvous is quite hectic in that we kind of need to get bogged down a little bit. In the realm of dreams, it can be depicting a desire to regain control. Henry reclaiming sex as a pleasurable thing rather than a stressful thing, only for it to lead to more stress. Another conception, perhaps. And this is where we get into a more grounded, real-world interpretation. The rendezvous actually taking place, a conception actually taking place. To me, explaining the scene where the neighbor faces her own personal meatball planet. From there, we have the final Lady in the Radiator scene. Didn't have enough room to put it on my whiteboard. Her song, In Heaven, Everything is Fine. It's a siren's call to oblivion. We see some sort of transaction take place. At least that's how it comes off to me. Not sure about that, but nonetheless, she disappears. Henry is stranded in that sort of Black Lodge area. He's confronted by the soul of his son that he will soon be murdering. And then the whole thing just sort of devolves into that nutty-ass scene. The rest of it is just too absurd to make sense of. Hey, but we can try. So, the man in the planet, the soul of his own child, scowls at him angrily. Those gametes get swept away. The recently germinated sapling is brought into the fold to soon start bleeding. And then we sort of see a reversal of the coming murder. Henry's head popping off and being replaced by his own child's, finalizing his whole transformation into a golem of regret, an Eraserhead. But that's the next segment. This particular scene where the child sort of cries out, is it just me, or is there some sort of like a righteous battle cry aspect to this? Like it's letting out one final cry of anger because of this betrayal. Now this takes us to the finale of the dream, the Eraser Company segment. I won't belabor the point there. I think I've given all my thoughts on the Eraser Company pretty thoroughly. Nothing to reappraise there. But yes, the dream ends with Henry becoming that golem of regret and his eraser brain being harvested to top pencils. In the theme of not wanting to belabor the point, since we just experienced the ending, there's no need to, reappraise it. It just happened. But there is some angles we can take it, especially surrounding that sort of face-off between Henry and the neighbor. For example, my initial interpretation is that the neighbor and Henry did, entwine, thusly conceiving a child and the neighbor then aborting that child. And so when Henry sort of faced with this reality, he kills his own son out of jealousy, but that's oversimplifying it. Like I said, we already went over it. There's another direction that we can take this, however. Not really direction, just another angle. And we'll get into that very shortly when we break down some of these characters. But let's just finish up. After Henry sacrifices his child for freedom, he gets just that. Freedom. Freedom from the mortal coil. Death. The culmination of the siren call. In heaven, everything is fine. It's very strange. The actions of Henry in the mortal world brought his son into the mortal coil, and the actions of his son in the immortal world sort of freed Henry from his mortal coil. It's a bit messier than that, and that's if I'm going with my whole Revenge of the Binding of Isaac kooky theory. But yeah, that's the plot. I think we've done all the appraising we need to do. With all that in mind, let's move on to the rest of our whiteboard breakdowns. Before getting into the meat of our major characters, I want to spend a little bit of time, not really a little, quite a bit of time, exploring these two peripheral characters to the angsty story of Eraserhead. That is the beautiful neighbor across the hallway and the lady in the radiator. On How Stuff Works article on the history of Lilith, as she's transformed in history from a demonic seductress to a feminist icon, you see all sorts of references to nocturnal emissions, visitations during the night, wasted seed, even the omen or the cautionary tale of married men who sleep alone in their home, at risk of being visited by the succubus. And so we can see the dream world version of the neighbor across the hall as a sort of maximized, just symbolic one-to-one version of that, perfectly embodying that sort of archetype. But let me be clear, the label of seductress falls flat when we're talking about lecherous, cheating men sleeping with a woman. However, I think that there is a scariness when applied to a situation where it is a totally vulnerable, stress the hell out, confused teenager, then yes, I think it's safe to say you're dealing with a terrifying predator. Now, of course, in the modern era, we wouldn't call this enticement as seducing, we'd call it grooming. However, I don't want to accidentally demonize an otherwise innocent character, because after all, this is all taking place in a dream. We've already thoroughly explored a literalistic approach, but how about we take a different one? What if within that chain of dream sequences, that physical encounter between Henry and the neighbor across the hall truly was just in a dream? Thematically, it works kind of seamlessly. What with, the sort of wet dream aspects that we were already exploring with the Lady in the Radiator sequence, and actually in the little horror in the bed with Mary sequence, pulling out the little umbilical cord nodules from the bed. It works out kind of just thematically, perfectly. And it just kind of, and it just, from an anatomical standpoint, it makes sense. Henry stressed the hell out, sort of having like this sort of parasympathetic response, having a dream of this nature of a beautiful, proximal, but otherwise unfamiliar woman. That nightmare, that dream being a stress response. Maybe a result of him not being able to take inventory of his angst, or maybe even specifically, if we want to kind of take the one-to-one predatory Lilith type thing kind of going, maybe not even take inventory of what happened between him and his in-law, his mother-in-law, the assault. And so the real-life image of the neighbor has been given all this dream world baggage. He sees her in the hallway, in the flesh. He stands there at the threshold, in his room, just in his world of just fight or flight. But on the other side, he sees this woman, her freedom, her choice of sexual liberation, and he yearns. But that yearning becomes jealousy, and when he closes that door and slinks to the floor, that jealousy becomes hatred. Maybe he's framing her as this rebellious Lilith-type figure because deep down, he wishes he had what she had. I don't know, it feels like we're painting a picture, but we're not using colors, we're just using trauma, basically. A lot of that was probably a stretch. However, I feel a bit more grounded in my takeaway from The Lady in the Radiator. The Lady in the Radiator, I think, broadly is a figurehead of Henry's desires. She stomps on the dropped gametes, simulating the explosion of them dropping as bombs in Henry's life. However, she too represents the bomb dropped on them, crushing the gametes under her heel. So when I say that she's this figurehead of desire, she represents the desire that led to the conception of this child, but then also the regret that follows. The child itself was the bomb that obliterated Henry's way of life, and so in turn, he obliterated the thing that obliterated him. Simple enough. Now, the family. Something I never really got around to mentioning. I just never really had the occasion to bring it up. If you go to the credits of Eraserhead, you'll come to learn that the surname of Mary, her family, is X. So she's Mary X, the in-law is Mrs. X, and the father-in-law is Mr. X. Of course, the X brings to mind a cross, specifically the Christian cross, and that kind of gets you thinking, okay, what are we dealing with here? Mary, obviously, Mother Mary. The baby is sort of begotten, sacrificial son. And so what does that make Henry? A sort of Joseph steward figure, but also a Judas betrayer figure. So going from printer to eraser, going from steward to betrayer. Mrs. X can just be seen as a sort of a Mrs. X should just be seen as maybe just an angel, a messenger of God, an extension of his authority. But she could also just be seen as the central authoritarian figure as well. But just like when I first even started exploring this stuff, obviously very half-baked. But I wanted to throw that out there. Here's what personally spoke to me when I explored Eraserhead. We'll start with the parents. Mr. and Mrs. X to me signify the two things that can happen when you lose control. Mr. X is a very passive and meek character, while Mrs. X is a very active, sort of authoritarian figure. And we even see this dynamic between the two. When we see Mr. X kind of lose his temper about his own occupation, look at my knees, look at my knees, we see Mrs. X just go straight for him, walk, just true direction. And he cowers before her. He's like, you guys hungry? A humorous scene, but nonetheless, it shows their dynamic. But think back to that scene though. What's the thing, the one moment he loses his temper over, or like he animates over? It's his occupation. The loss of control in Mr. X's case is the dwindling of his efficacy as a man, his ability to breadwin for his family, tied directly to the numbing of his arm, something we already established is kind of a phallic sort of thing. But not just that, even the work that he did do, the pipes he put into all these houses, all that work, his dynasty, his legacy, whatever you want to call it, going to waste because all of these homes went from green pastures to the hellhole it is today. Look at my knees. Mrs. X, on the other hand, her loss of control, I think, is more tied to her being spread too thin. Being a mother not only to Mary, but also her own mother, Mary's grandmother. One could possibly interpret her assault of Henry as a sort of, a desperate clinging on to some sort of past excitement, which I think is fascinating because, whereas one might make a fetish of the frustrated housewife, here we see a terrifying angle to it. Her authority is used in how she weaponizes motherhood against Mary. Perhaps she's tired of being spread thin, brushing her daughter's hair, making her meals, etc. And so this pregnancy is an opportunity, an occasion, to kick her out of the house. From the perspective of Mrs. X, she feels motherhood is being inflicted on her, so she finally gets to inflict it on her daughter. It's dark. It's very dark. Now, and it's only going to get darker. Mary and Henry. This is probably going to come off strange, but to me they almost are like a strange gender swap of how you might typically depict a dark story of teenagers in their specific scenario. Whereas one might write a teenage father cracking from the pressure and running off to shirk responsibility, paired with a teenage mother cracking from the pressure but not having anywhere to go, being abandoned by her partner, abandoned by her parents, and so breaking from reality, committing infanticide, we see it sort of flipped around with Mary and Henry. Her final scene in the flesh, not including the dream sequence, she quite literally tells Henry, I will do what I want. She reclaims some of that agency. Now granted, she doesn't run off permanently. She's supposedly, spending time with her parents to take a break. But nonetheless, just focusing in on that reclamation of agency. I'm gonna do what I want. And it's painful because it's sort of a too little, too late sort of thing. It's the first time so deep into the movie, so deep into the stress, that we finally see her take hold of her destiny. And so when we take a look at Henry, it's even more of a folly, even more too little, too late, more postponed. In the many cards he's dealt, he keeps checking, postponing. The only 2 decisions he's made in the entire movie, as far as I know, is the first decision when he chooses to go to the drawer and get the thermometer to give to the baby, which is a good decision, and then his second decision, to kill the baby. Obviously a bad decision. That thread connecting those two, from printer to eraser, from steward to betrayer, is that dream sequence. And within that dream, we can kind of see some, more decisions he makes, a possible deal he makes with the lady in the radiator, a decision to cheat on his wife or fantasize about cheating on his wife. But in that dream sequence, there's just millions of ways you can interpret that at varying levels of how literal you can take it. Let's save ourselves from being mind numbed. It's already bad enough to have it happen to your own arm. In short, the parts of Henry that he could control, the parts of his destiny that he could handle, he didn't. And that's why at the very beginning of the movie, I guess technically the first decision, before all the decisions we just talked about, the decision to, to do the hanky-panky, by the time the movie had begun, the post-title card sequence happened, all the decisions had already been made for Henry. The baby was born, the marriage was already going to be insisted on, the cat was out of the bag. And while obviously as a teenager, it's hard to appraise how much of any of that he could truly control. Of course, him being a teenager, his authority over the in-law parents, but also he's not the one that's pregnant. But he could have been more prepared. He could have been better oriented if he wasn't so paralyzed to figure out why Mary had fallen off the face of the earth. If you remember, he says, why don't you come around anymore? He didn't want to know why. He just assumed that it was over. That's why we saw the torn photo in his drawers. There's no way you could really candidly jump into this movie without coming off as either too harsh or too permissive or too soft. It's just so difficult. But I think that's the point. It's a fantastically depicted, stressful journey. And from the perspective of the boy or the young man, it puts you in a strange position. Because you see, ultimately it was Mary's pregnancy. It was her womb. It should have been her say as to what happens with the pregnancy. And that's the tragedy in her story, that she didn't have that say. It was her parents who made that decision for her, forced her to go through with this pregnancy at this young age, making that decision for her, despite it being Mary who would be the primary recipient of the stress, the duty, and the labor. But listen, maybe I'm being presumptuous. Maybe I'm writing a whole bunch of story outside of the periphery of what we as the viewer have access to. Let's just say she ultimately wanted to keep the baby. Well, to put it crudely, Henry would still be screwed. You could try and make your case as best you can, but ultimately it would be Mary's decision, which I think in part lends to why the movie is so uncomfortable, because you're not taking the position of the wholly sympathetic Mary. You're taking the position of just sort of like this bystander, like, the one half of the equation kind of thing. The purpose of this video is not to moralize too hard about any particular character. Obviously, what Mary's parents, did, forcing her to have the baby, forcing her to get married, and then using the baby as an occasion to kick her out and be like, oh, f*** you, I got mine. Obviously, it's wrong, and kind of makes David Lynch as sort of a boomer Nostradamus. And obviously, the events of the ending of this movie, what Henry did was absolutely deprived. I don't interpret what he did as a mercy killing of a sick child. I think there was a sort of rage that was behind it. There was like this sort of last second potency behind it. It was murder. But again, that's not the purpose of this video. We're not trying to create a Venn diagram of sins and grievances. In Eraserhead, we are simply shown a very uncomfortable, painful scenario, and at the center of it, three woeful kids, and their stories stir within us pain, compassion, and fear. The reason why we're just like chomping at the bit, pointing at the movie, saying, I don't like this, is because we don't like it. And that's the purpose of art. Well, at least when it's meant to do that. And that's all she wrote. It's been a while since I've covered a movie on this channel. I hope I haven't gotten too rusty. But man, like I said, and I say this almost every video, this was a long time coming. I am so happy to have finally gotten around to talking about Eraserhead. Normally it's at this point of the video, at the very, very end, I announce what the next topic is going to be. But I'm going to be honest, I don't know. I'm kind of torn between a few of them. I've got Look Outside, I've got No Skin, I've got the Bag of Milk games. I'm still kind of taking a break, trying to do my YouTube Shorts arc, as many of you have identified it as. So one priority would be a more compact topic. Not necessarily short, but compact. But yes, I hope you enjoyed these last couple of short morsels. As always, thank you so much for your guys' support and patience. So until next time, ma salama, suda sutun, hasta luego, I'll see you soon.